Everybody good? We good? All right. It's 6 o'clock, 6:01 officially. Call the meeting to order. All right, so please call the roll.
Chairman Wyckoff?
Mm-hmm.
Chairman
Here.
Cloud?
Sorry.
Commissioner Cloud? Commissioner Holloway?
Here.
Commissioner Noble? Commissioner Connolly? Commissioner Marr?
Here.
Commissioner LaRue?
Here.
Thank you.
All right, we squeaked in with a quorum. Great. Public comment, seeing nobody here, I'm going to skip the whole public comment deal. We need a motion to approve the minutes that you received in your package.
Motion to approve the June meeting minutes.
Thank you. Anybody second that?
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Please call the roll.
Commissioner LaRue?
Yes.
Commissioner Marr?
Yes.
Commissioner Holloway?
Yes.
Chairman Wyckoff?
That would be me. Yes, we're all good. All right, the minutes are approved. So under new business, we have item A, Resolution 2026-06, the moratorium on the collection of mobility fee and Kimley Horn impact fee evaluation.
Yes. And to clarify, I should have probably made two separate memos because I mean, both are related, but when you guys do the motion, the Kimley Horn impact fee evaluation thing is a separate thing. I just wanted to make sure they include it as a discussion item, but it does relate to this. So basically, this resolution continues the current moratorium we have on the collection of our local mobility fee, and we did last year because let me pull up the memo real fast. Per Florida statutes 163.31805J, a developer may not be charged twice for the same transportation impact. With the exception of an interlocal agreement between the city and the county to coordinate the administration of the county's multimodal impact fee, it is critical to evaluate whether the continued collection of the city's local mobility impact fee results in an overlapping charge. So basically, the board hired Kimley Horn to evaluate our fee versus the counties, and they said there was a potential conflict between them, and so we would continue. So this resolution that's going to the board would continue the moratorium, and then city staff would work on how to unwind our local mobility fee, because that'll most likely involve a comp plan amendment and an LDR amendment, so that'll take time to do. So that's why we're giving ourselves another year to work on that. The benefit, so right now we do collect the county's transportation impact fee, and a benefit to that is it's based on use versus so it makes sure that commercial things get charged more that have a larger impact than a single family home. And the single family home, they have different thresholds, and if it stays within a certain square footage threshold, there isn't a fee charged, which is beneficial. And then if you do go up to the higher threshold, you're only charged the difference. So using the county's fee is more beneficial, especially for homeowners around here if they're rebuilding. So I have the resolution attached and the Kimley Horn impact fee evaluation memo. So basically, this would just be a recommendation, but city staff recommends the board of commissioners to adopt resolution 2026-06 moratorium on the collection of mobility fee. The adoption of this resolution would continue the 1-year moratorium on the collection of the city's local mobility impact fee effective upon adoption until July 31st, 2027, unless the board of commissioners rescind or extend the moratorium by a subsequent resolution.
And the Kimley Horn memo is just a memo. There's
Just a
nothing-
memo, yeah.
That's not being incorporated into anything, correct? That's
Correct.
just
Yeah.
there.
I just wanted to show you why
For
we're
reference,
we're
right.
doing it, and probably the most important part of this memo is this last paragraph
Okay.
explains kind of why And then the county's currently working on an update to their mobility fees. Part of that stays on hold. So right now, it's still kind of the fees that they have are going to stay the same for the time being. The reason why they're not able to, the county, is because of SB 180, where they couldn't, potentially increasing impact fees would be considered more burdensome. So right now, that part of so as of right now, with that, it would stay the same, just because it started talking about in the memo about the update, which the city has been involved with going to when they have workshops for when the municipalities go to talk about different parts of it. So, thank you.
Okay. Any questions from our esteemed board of commissioners?
I'm just kind of curious, like, I mean, how much has this impacted any projects that have been has that been evaluated? Like, just in general, is pushing it out a year, I mean, I have no problem with it, but
I mean,
is that going to impact our ability to do anything?
So, I mean, we're still collecting the county's fee, and we get half of that back. And I don't think we've allocated anything with our local one, which I guess if we did away, we would have to give them. But I don't think any capital projects it's been allocated to. But I'd have to double check, and we'd still keep the county's fee, and then the one for rec and for public safety. So we'd still be keeping them, just not our local one, because of the potential of it being considered double dipping.
Gotcha. Okay.
And that double dipping could open us up to the city, up to lawsuits and fun things like that, right?
Yeah, I'm going to be careful. And it also shows the importance of the city coordinating with the county, because we kind of did that study back then without really working before Pinellas. We have a much better relationship with them now. That Jay and I really worked hard to rebuild that relationship. So it definitely shows that we're willing to work with them, but yeah, that's the problem if you don't work with them and you do your own thing, it can kind of lead to potential conflicting things like this. So
Okay.
Well, since you mentioned that, when we go to reevaluate, so this would be the second year that we're extending the moratorium?
yes, but we're still charging the county's fee.
Right. So are we potentially going to have to, when we do look at it, talk about refunding the difference if there was double dipping?
Yes, and even with the local one, if we don't spend it within a certain amount of years, we would have had to refund it anyways. But we'll have more details about that as we bring forward most likely a comp plan amendment and then an LDR amendment to unwind it.
That'll be taken into account, I guess, when you're saying
Yeah.
when you go back to do that.
Were-
Okay.
Were there a lot of people charged both of these?
I'd have to look back and write up a memo to go through that, because I don't want to make any assumption. But I mean, it would have been, we've had it in place for the last couple of years, but I'd want to like research more and bring that back.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the only reason I mean, we don't want to double dip, but the only reason I asked is because they gave this like weird caveat, like, well, technically you can still collect things. And I just, but if nothing's been allocated, then it seems like it's a no-brainer. Just
Yeah.
get out of the way of scrutiny.
Yeah, some of the things right now too is, if there's a way to lessen the burden on people trying to rebuild, because I know I've heard from some people being in the business that I am that they're like, oh, man, I can't believe the impact fees I got to pay. And they're substantial, and then if this is another one on top of that, it's really pretty burdensome. If you look at the number up there, on the single family dwelling at $288 a square foot for a 2,000 square foot, it's another, almost $6,000. And some of these people that are building bigger houses now, it's going to be pretty strong. So it's a lot of dough on top of what the county's already charging, so it gets up there pretty seriously. I mean,
Yeah.
I had one developer that was a luxury, and it's a 5,000 square foot house. So you take that times 5,000, it's a pretty strong number on top of what the county's charging, so.
So even with our local one, we would take off the existing square footage if they were demoing something, but as shown though, I think this is pretty important, showing that the county charges based on, because a shopping center obviously has more impact than a single family
Right.
house. So, because as you see, well, with our local one there, it charges a good amount more for the single family than what the county would. So I think it, and I've read through, since we've been involved with their update to their mobility fee, and it seems like, especially since they deal with the transportation, so Fort Pinellas is made up of both the MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization, that does the transportation planning, like the long-range transportation plan, and then they also have the Pinellas Planning Council, which does the countywide plan for like land use. So they have a lot of staff that's very skilled at calculating these things. So I just it makes sense to just go through them with this.
Sure.
And we get half the money back anyway, so
Okay.
it works in our favor just to work with them.
All right, any other questions?
Well, I wish I didn't, but I'm going to ask. I'm potentially wondering if I actually paid this fee and if I need to recuse myself from being able to.
Well, I mean,
on it.
technically, I don't think right now it affects you. It's just a moratorium going forward for another year, so it shouldn't affect you.
Okay. Well, I've done other things before this year, though. We did, like, for example, would it cover any type of renovation, any type of addition, anything like that, right?
Yeah, so you would have got charged an impact fee for the addition,
Yeah.
but like Commissioner
I knew you knew where I was
Wyckoff
going.
mentioned, I feel like this is more a moratorium just going forward. So possibly when we vote on like doing refunds, it would affect you.
Right,
okay.
yeah, if we do something later where we're changing the comp plan to address a refund or something, then maybe that
I
would be
should
where you
recuse
would do
my-
that. Yeah.
Okay. I'm
Okay.
good. Yeah, thanks.
All right, just need a motion.
I'll make a motion that we approve Resolution 2026-06, moratorium on collection of mobility fee.
All right, anybody got a second?
Second.
All right, any other discussion on the motion? Excellent. Let's call the roll, please.
Commissioner Marr?
Yes.
Commissioner LaRue?
Yes.
Commissioner Holloway?
Yes.
Chairman Wyckoff?
Yes. All right, pass. Resolution passes. Thank you, everyone, for that discussion. The next item is our discussion on landscaping regulations. So this is you, Joe?
Yes. So a few items I tried to highlight in the memo. The reason that we're bringing this forward primarily is from number one. That's what's really causing us issues. And then as we went through it, we figured we'd go through the whole section of the code since we're opening it up anyways. Number one is about residential landscape requirements for like substantial improvements, new homes, which obviously there's a lot of going on right now. Currently, the landscaping section of our code requires that a quarter of all single-family duplex or triplex lots has to be living ground cover, like grass, for example. So when you drive around the city and you see people with like a lot of shell or artificial turf, it doesn't meet that requirement. Now we're doing landscape inspections on all new builds, and if it doesn't meet the current code, then we're required to fail the landscape inspection, which could cause issues, obviously getting a CO or closing out the permit. And we feel like, based on the feedback that we've received from the community and our own professional opinions, the 25% living ground cover requirement might be a little too stringent than really necessary. We brought this to the city commission, and they also agreed. When we brought it to the commission as a workshop item, we highlighted a few different areas. We didn't necessarily recommend completely removing it. We just provided it as one of the options. And the commission pretty much was all in favor of just removing the landscape requirement, like the living ground cover requirement for the residential. And just to be clear, there's still ISR, which is very important. We want to preserve that. That's typically in the zoning section of the code. This is more for aesthetic purposes. So there's the landscape is the primary concern, and then that's highlighted on pages 16 and 17 is some of the proposed amendments to kind of address that. One of them I want to highlight. A lot of times when the city's made code updates in the past, is we focus on the actual text of the code, but I do want to highlight that it is in the purpose of the section. So we would want to reclassify the purpose if we decide to take away the living ground cover requirement or reduce it. Next item is right-of-way landscape materials. For like years now, Public Works has always talked about how it's a challenge when there's turf in the right-of-way or other sorts of ground cover that aren't really natural for doing utility work. Most cities, and I have a list of some other examples I can provide if interested, but most cities do restrict the city's right-of-way on what cover can go there. Our code is one of the few that doesn't have any restrictions, so we're not able to prohibit or limit anyone from putting like artificial turf in the right-of-way. Originally, when we brought this to the Planning Commission, after working with the Public Works Director, we provided a recommendation to like prohibit it almost completely. But then based on the feedback we got from the commission and after talking with the Public Works Director, we revised the ordinance in the packet to say more of as long as you get consent from the city. That basically what we envision is, based on the commission's feedback, is having some kind of form that anyone that's putting turf in the right of way acknowledges and potentially records on the property record that if the turf is removed, then if the city needs to remove the turf, say to do any utility work, then it's the property owner's responsibility, not the city. The city doesn't have to pay for that. In this current proposal, I specifically wrote that in the code about the agreement. After talking with Attorney Trask, he felt it wasn't necessary to specifically say that we need to require the agreement. So in the language that you'll see when we bring it back, based on that feedback, I basically just reworded it that it's at the Public Works Director's discretion, but we would allow it as long as that agreement is provided. That's number 2, and then that kind of jumps into number 3, which is artificial turf in general. So going back to number 1, how right now the code requires a quarter of the lot to be living ground cover. Obviously, artificial turf is not living, so it doesn't meet that requirement. Also, about a month ago, the FDEP released some guidance that overrides the city's current ordinance for single-family homes and says that the local government cannot restrict artificial turf on single-family lots. So right now, our ordinance is in conflict with that. So part of this would be to bring it into that. And the way our code is currently broken down, it puts single-family duplex and triplex into one category, and then everything else basically in another category for the landscape requirements. So this ordinance, the way we wrote it, kind of keeps that together, and we basically would allow the turf to qualify as landscaping for those single-family duplex, triplex, and then also the multifamily has a 10% landscape requirement instead of 25%, but it also has landscape buffers, which generally don't have turf. So kind of separating that. So the proposed artificial turf section of the code comes from the DEP guidance that was released about a month ago and is attached, as well as Clearwater passed a pretty elaborate artificial turf ordinance about a year ago. So we took a look at that, and theirs is pretty specific. Like, for example, they required, once they passed that ordinance, anyone that installed artificial turf in the right of way had to get a after the fact permit to even decide if they could keep it or not. Ours is kind of, what we're proposing here is kind of a more simpler version of Clearwater's. Since we have less staff, it's more manageable to enforce. And basically, we already require permits for turf because it falls under our definition of a structure, which means anything that's permanently affixed to the ground. So adding this into our code wouldn't be anything more strict than we're already requiring. It's just more specific to make sure it's permeable. So it basically would just be a spec sheet to demonstrate it's permeable, which we've already been requiring. And then certification from a contractor at the end that it was installed in accordance with that specification sheet. So that's basically what that proposed section 10637 comes from. Next is intersection visibility. So the city's code has like 3 different sections when it comes to intersection visibility, and they all 3 kind of contradict each other. So one of them is in the landscape section. What we're proposing here is to strike it from the landscape section and just reference the section of the zoning code, which is where it really belongs. That section is also where there's information about how to measure setbacks, what counts towards the building height and doesn't. So that's where we find is really the appropriate section for that. And originally when we brought this to the city commission, we kept it at, so basically there's a triangle where the intersection aligns, and this diagram is kind of visualizes it better. This is similar to how most cities enforce it. We looked at a few different municipalities. We're keeping this language, keeps our current interpretation of the conflicting codes, except we reduced the height. So the low point of the visibility triangle right now is 3 feet, 36 inches. And based on one of the commissioners' feedback, we're reducing that to 30 inches. The range that we've seen in other municipalities is somewhere between like the 2 foot and the 3 foot range. So the 30 inches is in line with that for the low point. So like shrubs can be maintained or a fence can be maintained below that 30 inches. Unfortunately, lowering it to 30 inches also brings other sections of the code in that would conflict. So the fence code, for example, on page 33, we didn't bring this to the commission originally because originally we were just going to keep it at 36, but just clarifying that we're just referencing that section instead of putting it directly in there. And then the other thing that we have that's not really related to landscaping, but since we have to open the section anyways, is section 110-447-3, which is the fence section. It says you can't have a fence that's closer than 18 feet from a seawall in the Gulf, but that's not really feasible. We already have a restriction that you can't have a fence beyond the coastal construction control line, which is what most municipalities have or is more enforceable. So that shouldn't be too controversial, just striking that. And then the last item is just the trees. Basically just updating our tree list. Right now, the tree list we reference for the species, first of all, it's a little more complicated than we need it to be. Like it says like 50% of the trees have to come from this list, or some of them have to come from this list. So really just, we looked at the comprehensive plan, and the intent is really to preserve Florida native trees and drought tolerant trees. So just for the permitted trees, I know it looks like everything's getting struck out, but if you scroll down to 106-71, any species from that same list, and then we can add some of the other ones too, would count. And the list it's pretty user friendly. If you Google it, there's all like hundreds of trees that would fall under the either Florida native or the drought tolerant of meteor or higher. And that list gets updated on its own, so we don't have to have the species directly in our code.
Okay.
Which is more modern in a lot of other cities' codes. And then also the prohibited trees. In this ordinance, I also just reference Pinellas County's list. But after talking to Attorney Trask, I basically just put them into our code because the undesirable species don't really change. And there's only like 6 or 7 of them, but basically the same ones. So that'll come in the next one. Only other things that are not included that are worth considering. We want to get some feedback on what should be allowed in the right of way when it comes to like shell, get a consensus on how the Planning Commission feels about right of way material. Also discussing Also, there's a section that wasn't struck out in 10633, which is the residential landscape, but same intent, just removing that vegetation would not be required with this proposed ordinance. So let me highlight that real quick. It's shall include, it says 25%. Vegetation, just anything that references vegetation for single family would be striking. And then we can also consider, a lot of other municipalities give credit. So basically every lot is required to have a certain amount of trees. A lot of municipalities have tree credits where if a tree is a certain size, an existing tree, you get credit for preserving the existing tree. Like, for example, the city of St. Pete Beach has, if the diameter at breast height, which is like 4.5 feet, is between 10 and 20 inches, then that would count as 2 trees. So we could consider adding something like that so that you can get credit for existing trees and not need to replant as many.
All right, so you're looking for our input on some of the more subtle parts of this, or maybe not so subtle when it comes to the right-of-way. So that's kind of a confusing part of this, right?
That, and then the only other item would be, that I didn't talk about, is screening of backflow preventers. We have in our code that they have to be shielded from public view, but if you drive around, they're not all shielded. So what we were thinking about doing is striking it from the landscape code, and then we're going to be redoing our maintenance code soon, and then putting in there that it just has to be properly painted and an orderly appearance. But yeah, that's all. That's what we're looking for here.
Okay. So you understand our task. We're just supposed to provide a little bit of input and guidance so we can get this dialed in right. If you're looking for an opinion, when it comes to the right of way, I don't know that it's fair. That's not the right word, but it doesn't make sense to make everybody have grass if the rest of your yard landscaping is not grass, right? Because, they got to go buy a lawnmower or a weed whacker to do that little strip of grass. But I think anything that's, if it's turf, then you sign off that says, hey, if we have to do utility work, it's on me to put it back in my yard. I get that. Or you can have anything else that's, replaceable. That's a common element. I don't know how you define that, whether it's shell, marble chips, whatever that might be, not a solid surface, right? You can't, what if it's concrete? I mean, I know we have driveways that go in the right of way that are solid concrete. What's the policy on that?
So we have another section of our code that specifically talks about the maximum width of driveways and sidewalks. So basically the language here says anything that doesn't fall into that category would have to meet this section of the code.
Okay.
So on that note, right, I think one of the things that's collectively confusing about this whole section is, and I think it's starting to be addressed, especially with saying changing pervious impervious a little bit to being like meeting landscaping requirements. I think that's important. But same thing in this public rights of way. I think loose shell or gravel or something like that, it's pretty easily removable. I mean, no one's going to be putting in a trench load of that on their property. So I think same thing with impervious surface, and where there's like to me, there's a lack of definition on that a little bit. But if it's loose and it's movable, and maybe it's of a certain maximum diameter or whatever, you're not gonna get hit with having to remove that, right? I mean, I can scoop shell up with a shovel, you don't need a heavy machinery to move that. So I think putting it in that context and in rights of way, if it impacts your property in terms of appearance, yeah, I mean, I think there should be some caveat for something that's more permanent versus movable, right? Obviously, installing turf in a right of way is definitely more permanent than grass.
Is there a way to define what would be considered, I mean, I guess that's what we're getting at. What is okay and that would be replaced if disturbed versus what would not be replaced by the city or county if it were disturbed? So we're saying turf, right? The artificial turf is on the property owner.
Yeah.
If you decide you're going to put turf in the right of way, you can, but if it gets destroyed in the act of upgrading or repairing utilities, that's on you, the property owner. Would there be a way to define a smaller group of things that would be replaced by the city or county and then everything else not?
Well, to that point, are we trying to limit what's there because we may have to go in and remove things and there's a cost associated with that? Are we trying to look at something that's visual, right? Are we trying to have more of a scheme, I'll say? But in that regard, to the permanent, not permanent, are there a lot of mailboxes that are in the right of way that are permissible in a lot of other municipalities with their guidelines? And so would we approve a mailbox being there or a CBU, right, if it's a larger development, if we're talking about the removal cost associated? Can we balance it to have some of that as well?
Yeah, that's a good point. So it really could be aesthetic, or the primary concern is cost, but it could be aesthetic as well. As far as mailboxes, the way that the language is proposed, it specifically talks about just the surface. You have to remember it's in the vegetation code, so I tried to keep it focused on that. So mailboxes and all of that, this wouldn't prohibit or limit that in any way. But that is a good point. We did think about that. So what we could do is possibly, instead of trying to define like what's permanent or not permanent, instead of saying artificial turf here, we can like reword it in such a way that it's really at the discretion of, because it's going to be case by case, discretion of the public works director, any such surface that would cause, cost to the city would be at the owner's expense, something along those lines.
Yeah, I think devil's in the definitions on that. Not to steer this a different way. I want to get here eventually, but like there's still references to impervious surface, and then if you go look at impervious surface, it doesn't really clearly define what we consider an impervious surface. But there are sections that kind of allude to what materials are considered impervious. If I'm wrong, that's fine, but it doesn't explicitly give that direction. So if we're going to say, permanent ground cover or something like that, I think we just have to add a definition for what that is, or at least list it up and, put it up front.
I think you're going to run into some trouble there clearly defining it, because there are so many products that are out there that are pervious, impervious, and you can't say it's only this is impervious or only this is considered pervious. Yeah. I mean, without getting into like percolation amount, definitions in your, so then it gets crazy, right? Do I have to bring the specs of my mulch in to, that it percolates at this rate? So I think that's hard. I think that's kind of hard.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And also I included our definition of impervious surface, and it is pretty consistent with a lot of other municipalities.
Okay.
And it is pretty broad for that purpose. And I just want to remind you guys that the impervious surface requirements are in addition to the landscape requirements in a different section of the code. And the right-of-way doesn't count towards the impervious surface ratio.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and like I said before, I think the edit to 10632, where you've kind of changed some of that to be more descriptive of, what landscaping requirements are for that 25% rule or whatever, is definitely an improvement as as a homeowner. I think it makes more sense than kind of this vague definition that we had before. So it's an improvement, that makes sense on the impervious. You can't really, define
Yeah.
that as well.
And just to add to that, the only reason that we could have just stricken the whole landscape requirements entirely and just relied on the impervious surface to carry that out, but the reason we're not doing that is because we still, other municipalities for impervious surface actually do, like, for permeable pavers, they might only give you 50% credit towards your ISR requirement. We don't do that. We don't have that, since we don't have anything like that in our code, we give full credit for permeable pavers. So until such time that we evaluate that, we wanted to keep something to prevent somebody from just completely putting permeable pavers that aren't going to be maintained over the entire lot. So that's why we still have, even though it's not really landscaping, depending on how you look at it, there's still a requirement for some ground cover.
Okay. Makes sense.
I mean, I like the looking at it from a cost perspective too, for the removal. That feels equitable.
For the right-of-way thing, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how how that flies with the property owners or legal, saying it's going to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis up to the community development director or the public works director. I don't know how. Right. Well, I mean, there's some subjectivity to almost everything, but there's got to be a ceiling or a floor placed on it, right? But I think that would be the best way to go. If there's some, burdensome cost to the city, whatever that definition of burdensome is, then it's on the property owner.
Yeah, I think anywhere, and Joseph brought up kind of like in St. Pete Beach where there's a kind of a credit for trees, right, of a certain diameter. And like anywhere we can provide some clarity that the public is going to have some sort of a credit for things that maybe were already there. I think that's a pro. We don't want this to just totally read as, well, we could get you later, or this could retroactively affect you, or whatever. I think maybe defining some more of those things. If there's other examples of that, I think the St. Pete Beach one was a good example. I don't know of any myself, but it would be helpful.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, regarding to the tree regulations, so a lot of this proposed change is more like explaining stuff, like organizing things a little bit better. Like, for example, some of the tree requirements are in all different sections of the code. I kind of tried to put them all in one section. The credit for existing trees wouldn't, if we added that, since we don't have that right now, it wouldn't really be a clarification thing, but it would be something to help homeowners not need to provide as many trees if they have larger trees. So that's something we can add that would be consistent with other municipalities to reduce like needing to plant new trees if there's existing trees.
I've got a question about a lot of the redevelopment that's going on. When an existing home is being elevated versus a tear down and rebuild, is the landscaping plan looked at differently?
No, it's pretty much the same. So if you look in the definition section of our code, new construction is defined as a substantial improvement, which
Okay.
elevating falls under.
So they would have to
same
rework
requirements.
the whole landscape plan on a house that's just being elevated,
Correct.
right? Okay. Okay. That was just a personal question. I didn't relate to this exactly, but it just kind of came to mind.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for that. All right. Any other input for our fine folks over here to consider as they're trying to straighten this out? I think it's really wise, by the way, to bring it to the county's stuff, to get us in line with the county, because I see it all the time, where there's inconsistencies. And if the city's wrong, the city's going to be wrong, and you're going to get taken to task on it, and the county's always going to win. And now that we have what appears to be a much better working relationship with the county, it certainly helps. But I think and a lot of the builders, they're having trouble with all the different municipal subtleties. And if a lot of us could revert back to what the counties are doing, I think it would streamline the process for everyone.
Yeah, agreed.
Just a question on the tree removal piece of this. What's the permit fee?
So right now, there's no permit fee for a tree removal permit. We don't really get that many of them, and honestly, that section has barely been enforced in the past. This section of code, I mean, hasn't been updated since like the 80s. So eventually, when we redo our fee schedule, we could add like a small administrative fee, because I know there's a lot of legislation that's pushing local governments to do more with less money. So I just struck out the like no fee thing in this section, so that if we did bring the fee schedule, that's an option. But as of now, it's not in our fee schedule, so there's no fee for a tree removal permit.
Really, the permit's more to make sure they're not removing protected trees and.
Basically, yeah, and it's basically if new construction is required to have a certain number of trees, if you didn't need a permit to remove it, then you can just tear them down as soon as you got the CO.
Gotcha. All right. Yeah. Yeah. Not that that's ever happened.
I think I do have a question on the artificial turf piece. I think it's good. There's been a lot of advancement in the products and stuff in that, and I think a lot of people are nervous about putting down grass. And if you're me and you're fighting weeds every day, even when we're in a drought, you are looking at that as an option. So I think it's good that there's some the subsection C of 10637. Is that consistent with, being able to find a readily available product that's reasonable, that is proven, like, hey, here's the manufacturer data, this is what I'm putting in?
Yep.
Is that, I just want to make sure it's very, attainable.
Yeah, so the most, probably I would say, restrictive of the requirement would be the permeability. And
C4.
yep, C4.
Page 19.
And I took probably about 10 spec sheets from artificial turf permits we've gotten in the past, and they all meet or far exceed that. That 10 inches per hour comes from the DEP guidance, so it's not just a number that staff made up. And then also, Holmes Beach also has a pretty elaborate artificial turf section, and theirs is 30 inches, so that's more restrictive.
Wow. Yeah.
So, and I've even seen spec sheets that say like 500. So I don't think that the 10 inches per hour would be burdensome.
So what about the one that has me hung up a little bit is B4. It's like closer than 10 feet. It's prohibited from being installed closer than 10 feet to the mean high water line along water bodies, including canals, except immediately landward of or on top of a seawall. So explain like I'm 5. Like if I have a home that backs up to a canal and I want to install this up to the seawall, that's landward of the seawall, right?
Yep, so that would be fine. So there's very few situations where B4 would restrict anyone in Madeira from putting turf, because all the canals have a seawall around them.
Yeah, right.
So in this
This is
section,
like if you're running down to a natural embankment.
Right.
You're kind of, okay.
so like I would say the Gulf, but there's also requirements if it's beyond the coastal construction control line. Yep.
Yeah.
So that really, we just took that from DEP guidance. But if you have a seawall, then you wouldn't have to worry about that.
Okay, cool. That makes sense, because that's most, like you said, most houses have a
can't think of
wall,
one.
so it's like, I just want to make sure you can go.
Yeah, you can call it a seawall.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
All
I mean, I
right.
think it looks good.
Any more? All right. Did that help in any way? Hope
Yeah,
we did.
no,
Hopefully.
thank you. Yep. And we'll bring this back with the changes and changes that Attorney Trask wanted, and then we can vote on it at the next meeting.
Okay.
Next item,
Nonconformities and business tax receipt requirements, is that where we're headed? Okay.
so this section of the code, I just want to preface, the entire non-conforming section of our code needs to be like completely redone. That is on our list, and it's going to take some more public feedback because really every building is not almost every building is non-conforming in some way. So that's something we want to spend a little more time and research and get feedback from the public before we change that whole thing. But this is just more of a reactive ordinance. Basically, there's a few sections of our non-conforming code that didn't typically get used before Helene and Milton, but now they're getting used all the time. And it's about rebuilding after declared disaster or getting damaged more than 50%. And those two sections allow you to rebuild non-conforming uses, which would include like a duplex in R1 zoning, for example, and not have to meet the current like single family requirement. So if you had a duplex, you can rebuild it, but there's a stipulation that those sections don't apply if you didn't have a business tax receipt, which the city requires a business tax receipt for anyone that's doing business or renting in the city at all. And not a lot of people don't realize that. So the commission felt like it was a hard punishment to take away somebody's ability to completely rebuild just for not having like a $10 business tax receipt. And there were two specific properties that were denied. One of them put a whole set of plans together for a fourplex, and we denied it because they didn't have a business tax receipt. So this was brought to you guys at the request of the commission. Well, the ordinance was redone at their request. That's the primary reason the section is coming to your attention. And what we're doing here is we're not completely striking it. The commission wanted to keep the intent of the BTR, but what we're doing is just saying as long as you submit your permit by a certain date, or I think it's 3 years from the storm, or get a zoning verification letter, which is a simple process. You just apply to the city to get in writing that, yes, you can rebuild this. And the reason we wanted to have that is so that we have some documentation, because without a BTR, it's going to be hard to document what is legally non-conforming versus what was done illegally. So we put that in there so that we can have, because the not rebuilding, there's no time limit on that. So we want to have some documentation to be able to tell years from now what was legally non-conforming even without a BTR. Number two, the redevelopment planning process basically is a section that if it's not hurricane related, then you would be able to rebuild the non-conforming use or density after it went through a public hearing. And that section of the code specifically exempts the R1 zoning district. We're proposing to strike that based on the kind of vibe, for lack of better words, that the commission is getting, that they want people to be able to retain their nonconformities. And just one thing to keep in mind is the intent of the nonconforming code is to end nonconformities. A lot of these sections of the code allow you to keep them, but it would allow everyone that's in every other zoning district to be able to apply for the same process. The R1 is this, mostly residential, so striking that would allow like someone that has a duplex to apply for those same rights. Without striking that, if someone had a duplex in R1, unless it caught fire or there was a hurricane, there's no way they'd be able to rebuild it unless it was less than 50%. Third item is in that section, as well as the rebuilding after catastrophic loss. The commercial of this section is kind of vague. It right now says that you can rebuild in the same footprint, and you have to meet these requirements, but it doesn't specify what about all the other requirements. So this is our interpretation on what the intent of the code was. Floor area ratio is more the limiting factor when it comes to commercial rather than residential. It's more comes to setbacks. So this would allow a business to rebuild what they had in terms of floor area ratio, as long as they meet all of the requirements. And then the last item that's really a change here is the deadline we talked about at the planning commission meeting a while ago, that there's a deadline to rebuild if your damage is less than 50%, and that deadline is September of this year. So we're proposing to extend that another year. We sent letters to about 500 properties that are either sitting abandoned or did unpermitted work, trying to get them to pull after the fact permit or pull permits. And we got a lot of feedback that there's a lot of programs that take time for people to even just rebuild under the 50% rule. So extending that a year would give those people more time to comply with the regulations. And this is not a section of the code that's required by FEMA, but it helps us a lot with ensuring we get the documentation we need for when FEMA audits us. We're expected to provide documentation on every single property that's not elevated and why they're still there. And so this helps us get that data. That's all I have. Happy to take any questions or answer any feedback.
This is giving them another year to get their permit.
Correct.
Even though the big red light writing on the bottom of all the city emails saying the deadline is 3
Yep,
months from now.
exactly. Yep. So that's exactly what it is. It would be another year for that.
I think some of that comes from some of the programs, as he mentioned, like Elevate Florida. There's not one building that's been started under the Elevate Florida program anywhere.
True, but also just want to clarify that if you're elevating, we have another section of the code in here that allows you to rebuild to the nonconformity. So elevating is substantial improvements more than 50%. That deadline is specifically to less than 50%, so the slab on grade houses. There's no deadline for someone to elevate their house.
Okay.
One quick clarification. So with rebuilding after catastrophic loss, that would be your structure got damaged during the hurricane and you fully demo it to build a new structure, and it allows you to retain like the non-conforming density. Like let's say you have a fourplex on a lot that could only fit a single family house currently, you'd be able to build a new FEMA compliant fourplex and retain that density. And then rebuilding after a redevelopment planning process is voluntarily doing that, where replacing a non-at-grade structure with a FEMA compliant structure. So I just wanted to clarify that because there was some confusion during the board meeting about, because some parts of it relate to someone fixing their existing house and some parts relate to building a new house or structure, or residential structure, commercial, that has, like, let's say, non-conforming density. And then with the FAR thing, so commercial, we use FAR to regulate it, and it's kind of weird to talk about rebuilding commercial and talk about the footprint, but we don't really look at the FAR. Very few properties would be in, but it'd be good just to have, because you wouldn't want a property that's at grade that covers most of the lot, and then you find out the FAR is higher than 0.55. Because that's kind of what we ran into in John's past, where you had these buildings that don't look that large but had very high FARs. There now, those are at least with the activity center now, the FARs are correct down there. But.
Okay. I like it.
So on the 500 letters that you sent out of these non-conforming general single-story homes, in your opinion, what percentage of those people are actually trying to get into a program that they're going to get some assistance from?
That's a good question. I don't have it exact. It feels like a lot because when somebody like gives you information, it's like, oh wow. But what I can do is I can get with Forerunner, and because that's where we're tracking all the properties, and by the next meeting I can see how many of those properties we either received, because we'll track conversations. The city gets CRS credits for tracking conversations related to floodplain in Forerunner. So when somebody comes in and says like, oh, I got this letter, but I'm waiting on funding, we'll keep them on like the no permit status. So they'll still be on that like 400 property list, but we'll put a note in there so I can see if I could get a number on the amount that we got notes from and then give you like a rough percentage at the next meeting.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to know. If you
Yeah.
ride around the neighborhoods, there's a lot of them that just look like
Nothing.
nothing.
Yeah,
You know, like
nothing
Front
happened.
doors laying on the ground. You can see the refrigerator still in there.
Yeah.
Type of- So,
Yeah.
interesting to know that.
Yeah, it would be. But at the end of the day, the goal wasn't, because if this deadline passed, then we would just be forced to deny all the remodel permits, which we'll see. We would see how that goes, but it could potentially even cause it to be longer because it'll take longer to elevate or build new. But also, we do get a lot of complaints about people trying to sell their property. It affects the property value when they're surrounded by properties that look like they've been abandoned. So trying to find that balance.
Yeah, I mean, I think I brought this up the last time we talked about extending the deadline for this, was trying to, I mean, besides the notice of commencement, but trying to at least get an idea of, to your point, like, who's actually trying. And, you know, maybe instead of perpetually extending the deadlines, getting to a point where it's like, okay, we understand this is taking a while, but at least you're showing a good faith effort of doing something, before the deadline, so that you don't get just completely cut. But it almost feels like perpetually extending it feels like it just continues to allow for continued kind of pushing off. And I, everyone's situation is different. I'm just kind of reading it like that a little bit.
Yeah, so am I saying in here that we're taking this 18-month deadline and now making it 3 years to get started?
So originally it was 18 months to complete the repairs. We recently, ordinance 2026-02, we changed it to, for Helene and Milton, just so we're on the same page, this is section 110-93, 3C.
Right.
We extended it from 18 months to complete to, for Helene and Milton, 2 years to get the permit. And then this would be extending that another year, which that deadline, the 36 months, would be in line with the RV deadline on when people have to remove the RVs off the property.
Yeah, I mean, to John's point, to see it all the house, there's a lot of them out there that nothing has been done, and this is just another 18 months or another year of nothing. I don't know.
I'm not sure I should comment, but I will. I am currently in this particular situation, and we have, I would say, 5 days after the hurricane, I signed an elevation contract, and my house is still elevated, not completed, and I could give the varied reasons for that. And Joe particularly has heard from my husband probably at least every 2 weeks since that time. But it's certainly not for a lack of trying.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's what
Right.
we're referring to. I mean, there are places that there is zero done. You're in the process, right?
Yes.
There's something happening there.
Yeah.
I can take you up and down the streets and show you where, I can show you too, on both sides of my current house. Absolutely nothing has been done. The garage door is still off, like half off, hanging there. The windows are windows are broken out of the back. It's just a mess. And the other one is all locked up, and you can see the mold on the windows. I mean, zero has been done to either one of those. And so who knows?
You have tangible progress
You've
going
made
on.
progress
And,
on
and even if,
something, yes.
and I
You're
guess,
in process.
and what I had suggested previously was maybe it's not tangible from the street, but it's tangible to the city that you are making progress. And like, okay, that checks a box, right? Versus nothing, I don't know.
And I guess to your, if you're tracking this already for another purpose, then it should be easy enough to say, okay, yes, we've received substantial communication or substantial work. We've seen it, we've heard it. I guess kind of goes back to the earlier conversations we were having on another, and it specifically had a question on this section. That's going to be within your purview or the city's purview. And are we concerned that someone's going to come forward and say, well, I've been trying to get this contract completed, or I've been trying to get my contractor to respond, and it's been like, do we need to have, maybe if we're going to agree to this timeline, do we need to have a little bit more structure on substantial progress? And if
Yeah,
that's something
exactly.
you guys could monitor, and is that too much on you guys to have to do?
Oh, yeah.
Some of the houses I'm talking about too may be more than 50% damage, so they don't even fall into this,
True.
Yeah.
right? So nothing's been done, but it doesn't apply, so maybe
Right.
that's not a thing. I don't
Unless they wanted
This is
to
hard.
appeal the decision, then, because we
Right.
do see a lot of people that are initially assessed as substantially damaged, submit the proper documentation and get it reversed.
Right.
They wouldn't be able to do that after the deadline passes.
And are some of them waiting to see what other homes have done, so the value, will that make a difference?
So that won't make a difference because the value of the structure is based on before the damage.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't love that blanket extension to go that far out,
Yeah,
but I
and-
guess you got to give something somewhere.
And I mean, at this point, every property in Madeira Beach, right? I mean, we're almost September 2026. How many have received their substantial damage letters that were supposed to, like on a percentage basis?
I would say like more than 90%.
Yeah.
Sorry,
So,
more
so
than
at this point, almost every property that was impacted from that storm and needed this clarification should have already received it.
Yeah, correct.
And therefore, if they wanted to appeal, I mean, I would be itching for that information,
Right.
if I'm in their shoes. And so if there was an appeal to be made, you'd think it would have already been made. And I guess those are the kinds of, I think if I'm picking up what I'm saying, what everyone else is saying, is like, there's a handful of properties where just seems like nothing has been going on. And, is there a way to quantify and identify what that is? And how do you introduce some sort of a structure where it's like, hey, we're going to do the extension, but, if you haven't done X, Y, Z by this date, then we move forward a different way. I don't know. Like you said, instead of a blanket, just, okay, everyone gets the extension again. I don't know.
Well, one benefit with us adding the zoning verification letter to protect density is that it'll allow people to demo these properties and know that their property rights are protected when because right now interest rates are high, like costs are high. It's hard to rebuild, but they still want to keep that density, because if they lost it, then it's like your property lost half the development potential. Like, let's say you have a lot that can only normally fit a single family. You have a duplex. If you lost that right to a duplex, then you lost a unit. So I'd hope with us adding that in, it would kind of, some people sitting on the fence would be more willing to demo if they know that they can come back and get the density they want if economic conditions improve.
That's
That's a good
true.
point.
And I was just thinking, like, maybe we can add similar language to this section here, but really a zoning verification letter for if your damage is less than 50%, would it really give us the documentation we need? Because then anyone could do that, and definitely valid concerns. It's tough trying to think of a way to put it in our code to force people to get going. And, obviously it's not unique to Madeira Beach. If you drive through all the communities, you're seeing similar issues. Like, for example, Pinellas County, I was at the Florida Floodplain Managers Association conference a few weeks ago, and they don't have anything like this in their ordinance, but they're planning on starting to do code enforcement for properties that were substantially damaged and didn't do anything. They talked about starting doing that in January, so we'll see how that goes. But yeah, it's tough to, because then also you have to think about, I mean, we've never been in this situation, I don't know the answer, but if the deadline passes, what does that actually mean? Then we would just be denying their permits. I mean, it's something, like I mentioned at the beginning, we have to redo this section of the code eventually anyways, hopefully before that second deadline, if we adopted that. And hopefully by then we can come up with some better solutions. But if we didn't extend the deadline and the deadline passed, which is a few months away, does that really get us to our goal of getting everybody that has an abandoned property not abandoned? Because I also asked Attorney Trask after we passed it the first time, does this mean that anyone that didn't get the permit after the deadline, we can send them to code enforcement and make them demolish the house? And his answer wasn't exactly like, yes, you can do that. We need like proof that they actually violated a section of the code. So it might not even help with, because then it's going to take longer to get a rebuilds permit as compared to a repair permit.
Yeah, it's definitely complicated. I think just the concern is properties that seem to have no intention are the ones that I think obviously we want everyone who wants to be here and wants to rebuild and all that to be here and come back. But there's definitely going to be a handful in this situation that are just like, nope, turn the keys back over and move on. And, then we're kind of dealing with it on our end, right? But yeah.
Well, to what you were just saying, Joe, if the deadline is not met, they would be in violation of the code, right? Would you start fining them? And at what point are we talking forced demolition? And do we want to get into that without some other documentation that we've, tracked it? Can we do a substantial hardship? I mean, are there things that you're talking about doing in the renovation, I'll call it of the code language, at a later point that might address some of the concerns too?
Possibly at a later point, because right now, like Andrew mentioned during his presentation, we're limited by Senate Bill 180, which says we can't make anything more restrictive than it already is. And if our attorney already interprets this code to say that you can't force demolition, then for us to put something like that in there, we would want to wait until after Senate Bill 180.
And I think that's supposed to sunset next year.
Yeah, and I think if we force the issue that we open up a different can of worms,
Yeah.
right? If all of a sudden we're saying, now you can't rebuild, you can't repair your house, then we're gonna have a lot more that are sitting around a lot longer while they're stuck in, potential litigation situations, right?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, there's the humanity factor too. There's some hardship cases out there we probably need to be sensitive to.
Yeah.
It's not just people not doing something. There's a reason they're not doing something in most cases.
Yep.
Yeah, whatever. Take that for what it's worth. I don't know.
But if you are tracking that, it'd be nice to know how many are, you've heard from, let's say, versus
Yeah.
no communication.
Yep, I'll definitely at the next meeting when we vote on the item, I'll get with Forerunner and see if I could get a rough percentage of the properties that we have on the no permit status that we've logged a conversation. And that will at least give us like a rough idea.
Yeah, that would be nice to know, because it's weird to like say, yeah, let's do, and then we're not really privy to the data of the collective, what's going on, and
Yep,
yeah,
makes
that would
sense.
be really helpful.
Sure.
Is the city doing any code violations now with, like, assume when the grass is X number of inches tall and they're doing that, and then if there's
Yeah.
just junk and debris and garbage laying on the ground, are they addressing that yet, or what's the situation?
Yeah, so we have, that would fall under the maintenance section of our code, and we are trying to be more proactive with that. I would say a lot of our code enforcement cases are work without permit because there are a lot of life health safety violations where people did the repairs and there was electrical exposed to floodwaters and now they're renting it to somebody. And we have a really big backlog with code enforcement. We only have one magistrate meeting a month, which is the same that we had before the hurricane, but we have like 5 times the amount of cases. So those life health safety ones are taking the priority, and then we're also getting a push from the Commission on Short-Term Rentals, so those will also be taking a priority. But that is another section that we're starting to do more code enforcement on.
Okay.
All right. Anything else we need to dive into? Good? Good enough?
Yep, thank you.
All right. We don't have any other old business, or we don't have any old business. Any administrative or staff presentations beyond what we've already gone through? Anything new we need to? All right. Anything planning commission wants to discuss in general? I do have something we probably should put on the next meeting agenda. We don't have a vice chairperson. It's on there? Okay, perfect. Yeah, I thought of that as I was stuck in traffic. I'm like, oh, who's going to do this? So yeah, we'll have to elect a vice chairperson. Next meeting scheduled for August 3rd, Monday, here, 6 p.m. See you then. And we'll call this thing adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.